Imagine you're holding like a report card for a student, and it is, by all traditional metrics, just completely flawless.
Right, like straight as across the board.
Exactly. You are looking at a nation that sits really comfortably in the very high human development category. You're seeing near perfect gender equality in basic health, universal education, all of it.
And a society that has practically eradicated severe multidimensional poverty, which is huge.
It is. On paper, using, the classic definitions of progress, it's this utopian success story.
Yeah, it's the exact statistical profile that international development agencies spend, well, literally decades trying to engineer.
Right. A demographic and economic architecture that actually works for its people.
Exactly.
But then you flip that perfect report card over,
Yeah.
and on the back, there's this glaring, almost unbelievable red flag staring right back at you.
A massive red flag.
Yeah, a red flag regarding the planet itself. The ecological footprint required to achieve that utopia is so massive, so disproportionate, that suddenly the entire picture of what success means gets incredibly complicated.
Because that red flag is a carbon footprint that essentially destroys the curve.
It really does.
We are looking at Trinidad and Tobago today, a country that presents us with, the absolute definition of a modern developmental paradox.
So today's deep dive into the source material is going to tear right into that paradox. We have this massive archive of data in front of us.
Right, 30 years of global indices.
Yeah, tracking everything from wealth and education to gender parity and carbon emissions, stretching from 1990 all the way to 2023.
That's a lot of data.
It is. And our mission is to figure out how Trinidad and Tobago, or TTO, as we'll probably call it, managed to become this shining beacon of human development while simultaneously carrying an environmental footprint that is, frankly, staggering.
Well, the macro numbers establish that tension perfectly,
Let's hear them.
So for the year 2023, TTO has a Human Development Index, or HDI, of 0.807.
Okay, 0.807. And where does that put them globally?
Out of over 200 countries and territories, that places them right around the low 70s, like 72nd in the world.
Which is a highly commendable position. That's top tier.
It really is. But we cannot look at that achievement without simultaneously looking at their extreme per capita carbon emissions.
Right, the red flag.
Yeah, it completely fractures the traditional narrative of what a developed nation looks like.
I want to trace exactly how they built that utopia before we tear it down with the environmental reality, though.
Sure, that makes sense.
Because if you chart their raw HDI data from 1990 to 2023, it initially looks like this beautiful, placid upward curve.
A very steady climb.
Yeah. In 1990, their HDI was 0.661. By 2023, it climbs to 0.807. That is a 22% increase over 3 decades.
And to give that number some scale, the world average HDI in 2023 is 0.756.
Oh, wow. So they are way ahead.
Exactly. TTO isn't just keeping pace, they're significantly ahead of the global curve. They are securely anchored in that very high human development tier.
But we need to define what that 22% increase actually means for, the people living there.
Right, it's not just an abstract mathematical bump.
No, moving from the 0.6 range into the 0.8 range represents an entire generation experiencing a fundamental transformation in their baseline reality.
Yeah, because HDI isn't just gross domestic product, it's a composite index.
Right, it measures a long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living.
Precisely. So a 0.661 in 1990 describes a society where, say, secondary education might still be a bottleneck.
Where the healthcare system can handle acute issues, but maybe struggles with long-term preventative care.
Exactly. And where household income is highly vulnerable to shocks. But a 0.8807 in 2023 describes a society where tertiary education is a widespread expectation.
Where maternal care has been heavily institutionalized.
Yes, and where there is a robust economic buffer. It's literally the architectural blueprint of prosperity coming to life over 30 years.
But I was looking closely at the timeline of that growth, and it is absolutely not a clean 45-degree angle pointing straight up to the stars.
No, it's not. The ascent actually dies out.
It totally flatlines.
Yeah, we see a steady, robust climb through the 90s and the early 2000s, but then we hit the mid-2010s.
Around 2014 or 2015, right?
Right. Around then, the HDI reaches about 0.805 or 0.808, and then it just hits a wall.
It just stops.
For nearly a decade, right up to our latest 2023 data, the number has essentially hovered in that exact same spot, landing at 0.807. The rapid ascent completely stalled out.
This reminds me of a concept in video game design. like the level cap.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Right. Like when you're level 10, getting to level 11 just requires a few basic quests. You pour some concrete, you build a primary school, you run some copper wire for electricity, and boom, your HDI goes up.
Yeah, brute force solutions.
Exactly. But when you hit level 80, leveling up to 81 requires exponentially more effort. You can't just pour concrete anymore.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize the mechanics of macroeconomic development, actually.
Is it?
Yeah. Moving a country from low to medium development is often a matter of solving logistical brute force problems, like you said.
Immunizing children, ensuring access to clean water.
Right, teaching basic literacy. The solutions are well known globally, they just require capital and execution.
But pushing past that point 0.8 OVO barrier is different.
Extremely different. Moving from high to very high requires solving structural, deeply entrenched societal issues.
Because all the easy wins are gone.
Exactly. You aren't just trying to get kids into a classroom anymore. You're trying to ensure the curriculum actually competes in a global, high-tech knowledge economy.
You aren't just providing antibiotics for infections, you are managing chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease.
Right, in an aging population. So the return on investment for every dollar spent drops dramatically. The friction increases.
And to overcome that friction, you need immense amounts of capital.
You really do.
Which makes me look at that decade-long plateau in their human development, and you have to wonder where the fuel ran out. Because human development isn't free. It runs on money.
And when we look at TTO's gross national income, their GNI per capita, the story gets wild.
Oh, this is not a placid curve at all. This is a terrifying roller coaster.
It is arguably the most volatile metric in our entire data stack.
Walk us through it.
So if we look at the actual values, adjusted for purchasing power parity or PPP in 2021 US dollars, we see a stunning trajectory.
Okay.
In 1990, TTO's GNI per capita was a modest $12,865. Fast forward to 2008, and it peaks at an astonishing $34,530.
Wait, they almost triple their national income per person in less than 2 decades.
Yes.
That is a tidal wave of cash.
It is a flood of capital that fundamentally altered the nation. But, look at the descent after that.
Right, it doesn't stay there.
Not at all.
Yeah.
By 2020, it drops to a low of $26,590. And as of 2023, it's sitting at exactly $27,000.
So they are currently operating on roughly a 21% drop from their historic peak in 2008.
Exactly, a massive 21% contraction.
Let's contextualize that peak, though, because 2008 wasn't exactly a banner year for the global economy.
Oh, absolutely not.
The rest of the world was staring down the barrel of the Great Recession. Mortgages were defaulting, banks were collapsing. Why did Trinidad and Tobago hit their absolute zenith right when the rest of the globe was catching fire?
Well, the answer lies in the physical nature of their economy. TTO's 2008 peak perfectly mirrors the massive, unprecedented global boom in energy and commodity prices that immediately preceded the financial crash.
Of course, oil.
Right. When oil and natural gas prices were sky high, TTO's economy, which is heavily structurally reliant on hydrocarbon extraction and petrochemical exports, was generating massive revenues.
They are a classic energy exporting nation.
Exactly.
So it's like a lottery winner dynamic. You hit the jackpot in 2008 because the world is desperate for your oil and gas. You upgrade your infrastructure, you build up your HDI, your schools, your hospitals.
But the vulnerability is stark.
Yeah, because when global financial shifts occurred post-2008, and later when the systemic shocks of the 2020 pandemic completely shut down global energy demand, their income plummeted.
It highlights the extreme fragility of resource-dependent wealth.
It really does.
However, we have to look closely at how the society absorbed that shock. Despite a 21% drop in income since 2008, their overall human development index didn't crash.
As we discussed, it plateaued, but it didn't collapse.
Right.
That feels counterintuitive to me. If your national paycheck gets slashed by a fifth, I would expect the cracks to show up in the hospitals and schools almost immediately.
Well, it speaks to the lag effect of institutional investment.
How so?
A massive influx of cash is required to build the infrastructure of a modern society. The physical hospitals, the university campuses, the water treatment plants.
Right, the heavy lifting.
But once that capital expenditure is made, the human benefits of that infrastructure have a long tail.
Oh, I see. A hospital built with 2008 oil money is still treating patients and saving lives in 2023.
Exactly, even if the National Treasury isn't seeing those 2008 revenues anymore.
It's the difference between capital costs and operational costs. They bought the house in cash, basically. Now they just have to keep the lights on.
Precisely. And we must also acknowledge that even with a 21% drop, TTO's GNI per capita of $27,000 is still vastly superior to the 2023 world average.
Just what, around 20,000?
Yeah, about $20,327. So they have a massive economic buffer compared to most of the planet. They are not impoverished. They are simply adjusting to a lower altitude of immense wealth.
I want to dig into what that immense wealth actually bought them, though, specifically regarding human life.
Okay, let's look at health.
Because this is where the data reveals a really quiet, hidden crisis. On the surface, the overall life expectancy in TTO is 73.49 years.
And the world average sits at 73.3 years.
So statistically, if you just glance at the top line number, they look completely normal, average.
But averages are notorious for hiding fractures in a society.
They really are.
When we split this life expectancy data by gender, the normalcy completely vanishes.
What happens?
Well, in 2023, women in TTO are living to an average of 76.6 years. Men, on the other hand, are only reaching 70.3 years.
Wait, 76.6 versus 70.3. That is a gap of 6.3 years.
It is a substantial gap.
I mean, I know women generally outlive men globally due to a mix of biological and behavioral factors. But viewing a country as a single household, it is deeply concerning when one half of the house is consistently outliving the other half by more than half a decade.
And the historical trend is what makes it a crisis, honestly.
How so?
Since 1990, female life expectancy in TTO grew by roughly 6.5 years. In that same 30-year period, male life expectancy grew by only about 5.3 years.
So the gap isn't closing.
No, it is actually widening. This highlights specific societal vulnerabilities for men in TTO that pure economic wealth simply isn't solving.
I have a theory about this, tying back to what you said about the 2008 wealth boom.
I'd love to hear it.
The engine of their economy is oil, natural gas, and petrochemicals.
Yeah.
That implies a heavy industrial reality, oil rigs, refineries, deepwater drilling, heavy manufacturing.
Yes.
That workforce is traditionally overwhelmingly male. Are we seeing the biological cost of that labor?
You are identifying a crucial mechanism there. In heavily industrialized, energy-dependent economies, male-dominated occupations carry significantly higher physical risks.
Like occupational hazard exposures?
Exactly, and long-term environmental toxic exposures. You are essentially trading bodily wear and tear for high wages.
That makes a lot of sense.
Furthermore, you have to factor in behavioral health risks. Cultural norms around masculinity often dictate that men seek preventative medical care much later than women.
So they wait until the chest pain is unbearable instead of getting their high blood pressure checked a decade earlier.
Exactly. And we cannot ignore the mental health pressures tied to economic provision, especially in an economy that has seen a 21% drop in per capita income since its peak.
Right. When an economy contracts and male-dominated heavy industries lay off workers, the resulting stress is huge.
The stress, substance abuse, and cardiovascular impacts fall heavily on the male demographic. The oil wealth bought the women more time than it bought the men.
Wow, that is a sobering reality. But let's shift from how long they are living to what they are doing with those years.
Okay, let's look at education.
Because when we look at the educational data, the story takes a massive pivot. We see a total transformation of the societal pipeline.
The education metrics are truly paradigm shifting. The mean years of schooling, which is the average number of years of education received by people ages 25 and older, is 10.79 years overall.
Okay, almost 11 years.
But the far more predictive metric is the expected years of schooling. This measures how many years a child entering the school system today can expect to receive throughout their life.
And here is the flip. The expected years of schooling for females is 14.59 years. For males, it is only 13.7 years.
The women are not just keeping pace, they are pulling ahead.
Significantly ahead. And the historical context is vital here.
It is. Back in 1990, the expected years of schooling for women in TTO was only 10.69 years.
So from 10.69 up to almost 14.6 years.
Yeah. By 2023, it leaped to 14.59. That is nearly 4 additional years of institutional education added to the life cycle of an average female citizen in just one generation.
Think about what 14.6 years of expected schooling actually looks like in practice. That is not just universal high school.
No, it's not.
That means an entire generation of women is entering the tertiary education system. They are going to university, getting specialized degrees, and staying in the academic pipeline significantly longer than the men.
It is the definition of a leading indicator.
What do you mean?
Well, education is the pipeline for power, influence, and economic control. When women dominate the tertiary education pipeline, it signals a massive inevitable shift in future workforce potential.
Because the people holding the advanced degrees are the ones who eventually write the policies.
Exactly. They manage the hospitals and they direct the legal frameworks of the nation.
I see this in corporate structures all the time. The demographic makeup of university graduating classes today dictates the demographic makeup of the C-suite 20 years from now. So TTO is essentially loading up a massive reservoir of highly educated female talent.
They are. And that leads us directly into the broader structural reality of the country and what we might call the gender equality tipping point.
Right.
This educational advantage is bleeding into their core developmental indices. Let's look at the Gender Development Index, the GDI.
This index measures gender gaps in human development achievements, right?
Essentially, yes. It compares the female HDI to the male HDI. A score of 1.0 means perfect parity between men and women in basic developmental capabilities.
And Trinidad and Tobago has a GDI of 0.990.
They are a hair's breadth away from statistical perfection.
They are in the absolute top tier globally for this metric, because if you isolate their separate HDI scores, the female HDI is 0.801 and the male HDI is 0.809.
Right, they are virtually identical. The basic capabilities of a human life, health, knowledge, and living standards are distributed with remarkable equality.
But I want to push back on this perfect parity narrative for a second.
Oh, go ahead.
Because the GDI just measures basic capabilities. Having the capability to do something is not the same as having the power to actually do it in society.
That's a very fair point.
We need to look at the Gender Inequality Index, the GII. That measures the messy stuff: empowerment, reproductive health, and labor market participation.
You are absolutely right to draw that distinction. The GII is a measure of loss. It calculates the loss in potential human development due to inequality between female and male achievements.
So a lower GII value indicates lower inequality.
Exactly. And TTO's GII currently sits at 0.262, which ranks them 71st globally out of all measured nations.
That 71st ranking is fascinating to me, because their overall raw HDI rank, their pure economic and developmental score, is 72nd.
Right.
They're actually ranking better globally in reducing structural gender inequality than they are in generating raw human development. Is that common?
It is relatively uncommon, especially for an energy-exporting petrostate.
Why is that?
Often in hydrocarbon economies, you see the exact reverse: incredibly high raw wealth masking deep patriarchal societal inequalities.
Like several Middle Eastern oil states as a classic example of high HDI but poor GII.
Precisely. For TTO, the drop in the GII from a very poor 0.477 back in 1990 down to 0.262 today shows that the actual institutions of a country are actively reforming.
The legal frameworks and the political access are structurally changing to empower women.
And the parliamentary data backs that up in a huge way.
Let's look at that. In 1990, women held only 19.4% of the seats in the national legislature.
Barely a fifth.
Yeah. But by 2023, that number had surged to 33.7%. That's a 74% growth over 30 years. They even hit a milestone of 31.5% back in 2015.
Over 1/3 of the legislative power is held by women. That is a massive threshold to cross.
It's a critical mass, right?
It really is. When a minority demographic crosses the 30% threshold in a legislative body, sociologists often note that they start being viewed as a special interest group and begin fundamentally altering the mainstream legislative agenda.
Okay, but here is where I really struggle with the data.
Where's that?
We have women expecting nearly 15 years of education. We have women holding a third of the parliament. We have a GDI of CO 0.990. But when I look at the labor market data, the illusion of perfect equality just completely shatters.
Ah, yes. The labor participation rates.
In 2023, the male labor force participation rate is 64.19%, but the female participation rate is only 46.73%.
It's a glaring gap.
Less than half of the women are in the formal labor force. How can we call this a success if the economy refuses to utilize the women it just spent a decade and a half educating?
It is the most glaring contradiction in their entire economic profile. And the historical trend is even more alarming.
How so?
Female labor force participation in TTO actually reached a high of 53.14% back in 2006, right as the oil boom was accelerating. But since then, it has been slowly declining or stagnating.
So they're acquiring the human capital, they're getting the degrees, but they're hitting a brick wall at the office door. Why?
This suggests a profound systemic bottleneck. It likely ties back to what we discussed earlier, the nature of the economy.
The heavy industry again.
Right. An economy heavily reliant on heavy industry, offshore drilling, and petrochemical refining simply does not create the same volume of diverse, service sector, or knowledge-based jobs that typically accelerate female labor participation.
That makes total sense.
Furthermore, we have to consider persistent cultural expectations regarding unpaid care work. If the societal infrastructure for affordable childcare isn't robust, highly educated women are forced out of the formal labor market to manage the household.
Regardless of their university degrees.
Exactly.
That is a staggering waste of economic potential. You have this massive engine of educated talent just sitting on the sidelines.
It is. However, to understand the full picture of the GII, we must also look at where the institutional victories have been absolute, and that is in reproductive health.
Oh yes, the maternal mortality data is phenomenal. It shows exactly how that 2008 oil wealth was successfully translated into institutional health infrastructure.
The numbers are incredibly strong.
In TTO, the maternal mortality ratio is 26.5 deaths per 100,000 live births. The global average is a tragic 216 deaths per 100,000.
TTO is providing a level of maternal safety that is an order of magnitude better than the global mean.
That's a huge difference.
And you can't fake that. That requires highly trained obstetricians, widely accessible prenatal care clinics, and robust emergency surgical infrastructure. A maternal mortality rate of 26.5 is the hard proof of a functioning healthcare state.
And the adolescent birth rates confirm it too. They are at 35.99 births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19, which beats the global average of 39.0.
It paints a picture of a healthcare system that is not only highly functional but accessible to the youth.
Providing reproductive education and resources.
Which brings us to a broader point about equality in the nation. Because gender isn't the only place where TTO is successfully defeating structural inequality. We have a metric called the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, or IHDI.
I was looking at the methodology for the IHDI, and it is a fascinating concept.
It really is.
It basically says, sure, your country's average wealth and education might be high, but if all that wealth and education is hoarded by a tiny elite living in the capital city, we're going to penalize your score.
Exactly. The IHDI discounts the HDI based on how unevenly health, education, and income are distributed across the entire population.
And TTO's data on education here is just breathtaking. The inequality in education in TTO is a shockingly low 5.7%.
It is remarkably low.
To put that 5.7% in perspective, the global average for educational inequality is 21.46%. Their educational inequality is barely a quarter of the global average.
It means that the 14-plus years of expected schooling we talked about isn't just a privilege for the wealthy elites or those living in affluent neighborhoods.
It's for everyone.
Right, that educational infrastructure has been democratized. It is broadly and evenly distributed across the population.
And inequality in life expectancy is also low and steadily dropping, hitting 10.66% in 2023.
And the ultimate proof of this democratization is the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the MPI.
Now, MPI doesn't just look at whether you make $1.90 a day. It looks at a checklist of overlapping deprivations.
Like what?
It asks, does your home have a dirt floor? Do you have to walk 30 minutes to get clean drinking water? Is there a child in your house not attending school?
Yeah.
Have you lost a child to preventable disease?
It measures the lived reality of poverty rather than just the financial ledger.
Exactly.
Right.
And TTO's MPI value is a microscopic 0.0002. Only 0.5% of the population is considered multidimensionally poor.
They practically wiped the checklist clean.
To get an MPI of 0.002, you can't just hand out stimulus checks. You have to physically run water pipe to every rural village. You have to ensure every neighborhood has an accessible school. You have to build an electrical grid that reaches the margins of society.
And even within that tiny 0.5% who still suffer from multidimensional poverty, the data is highly granular. It shows us exactly where the remaining vulnerabilities lie.
Where are they?
The major contributors to that residual poverty are child mortality, contributing 64.2% to the index, and school attendance at 17.3%. Oh, wow. So 64.2% is just child mortality.
Yeah. This means that deep systemic infrastructure lacking poverty have been effectively eradicated. What remains are highly specific, localized challenges, perhaps isolated communities or specific families slipping through the cracks of early childhood health.
If you are born in Trinidad and Tobago, the baseline guarantee of your existence, your absolute floor for getting a basic education, having access to life-saving maternal health care, and avoiding extreme multidimensional poverty is among the most secure anywhere in the developing world.
It is a remarkable achievement.
They took that 2008 oil boom money and they built a fortress of basic human security. On paper, applying traditional metrics of success, Trinidad and Tobago is a masterclass in development. They turned hydrocarbon wealth into human wealth.
They absolutely did. They conquered the foundational challenges of the 20th century.
But here is the plot twist.
Here we go. Here is where the beautiful, placid narrative completely derails. Because everything we just talked about, the universal schooling, the low maternal mortality, the microscopic poverty rate, it all comes with a bill.
And that bill isn't being paid with dollars.
No, it's not. It's being handed directly to the planet.
This is where the paradigm of our analysis must fundamentally shift. We have to introduce the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index, the PHDI.
This is the metric that ruins the utopian report card. The PHDI takes all those wonderful HDI achievements we just celebrated and brutally discounts them based on the country's carbon dioxide emissions and their material footprint.
It calculates the ecological violence required to sustain that high standard of living.
And the numbers for TTO are staggering. The data shows that TTO produces 22.36 tons of carbon dioxide per capita. This is production-based emissions.
And to understand the gravity of that number, the world average is just 4.54 tons per person.
TTO is producing nearly 5 times the global average per person. That is an immense, almost unfathomable volume of emissions for a small island nation.
It radically alters how we view their development. When the HDI is adjusted for these planetary pressures, creating the PHDI, TTO's index score plummets.
Just a massive drop.
Globally, the average gap between traditional HDI and the new PHDI is about 10%. That represents the environmental cost of a country's development. But for TTO, this gap is a gaping chasm.
Let's really analyze the philosophy of this, because it asks the defining economic question of our era.
Which is?
If a country builds a utopian society, everyone goes to school, no one is starving, women and men have nearly equal capabilities, but they power that utopia by essentially burning down the global neighborhood, is it actually a highly developed society?
That is the big question.
Can we call it a masterclass in human progress if the byproduct of that progress is accelerating the climate crisis?
It forces us to confront the fact that progress is rarely linear, and it is almost never free.
Never free.
All the wealth, the long lives, the excellent schooling, the 0.002 MPI, it has all been heavily subsidized by a carbon-intensive, ecologically heavy model. And we must be clear about the nature of those 22.36 tons of CO2.
Right. This isn't just citizens driving large SUVs or leaving their air conditioning running.
No, it is not individual moral failing.
It's the structural reality of their macroeconomic engine. It is an economy based on extracting, processing, and exporting fossil fuels and petrochemicals to the rest of the world.
The very engine that bought the human development, that funded the 14.5 expected years of schooling and the maternal health clinics, is the engine causing the massive planetary pressure.
It's the ultimate double-edged sword. You look at their material footprint, too. The global average material footprint, which measures the raw materials extracted to meet a country's consumption, is around 12.71 tons per person.
And TTO's data fluctuates over the years, but the aggregate pressure of their industrial model is overwhelmingly heavy.
They are a small island nation in the Caribbean, but structurally they are leaving the ecological footprint of a massive industrial titan.
And this brings us to the strategic outlook. We have to synthesize this entire 30-year data stack and redefine what developed actually means for the future.
So what's the verdict?
The narrative is unequivocally clear. Trinidad and Tobago has conquered the human development basics. They have the wealth buffer, they've closed the basic capabilities gender gaps with a GDI of 0.990, and they've democratized education.
As you said, they won the 20th century game.
Precisely. But the rules of the game have fundamentally changed in the 21st century. The urgent existential mission for their future, and frankly, the future survival of their economy, is addressing those 22.36 tons of per capita carbon emissions.
Sustainable development is no longer just a diplomatic buzzword. It is the absolute prerequisite for long-term viability.
Because the global market is shifting. If the world transitions away from fossil fuels to hit climate targets, the global demand for TTO's primary export drops.
And if that drops, their $27,000 GNI per capita drops. And if that income evaporates, who pays for the 14.5 years of expected schooling?
Right. Who funds the high-tech hospitals keeping maternal mortality at 26.5?
But utopia collapses without the carbon fuel.
Exactly. The challenge for TTO is arguably the hardest macroeconomic maneuver possible. They must figure out how to transition from a fossil fuel-heavy economic engine to a green, diversified economy without collapsing the very income streams that currently pay for their high life expectancy and social safety nets.
How do you dismantle the engine of your car and replace it with an electric motor while you are driving down the highway at 70 miles per hour?
That is the multi-billion-dollar
It
question.
really is.
However, the data also provides the potential solution.
Oh, how so?
As we noted earlier, they have a massive reservoir of highly educated female talent women with nearly 15 expected years of schooling that is deeply underutilized in the current labor market.
Right, with participation rates around 46.7%.
Because the current heavy industry economy isn't absorbing them, but a transition to a green, knowledge-based economy, focusing on technology, sustainable services, and advanced manufacturing might be the exact catalyst needed.
Oh, I see. Diversifying the economy away from raw hydrocarbons could simultaneously lower the carbon footprint and create the specific types of labor demands that close that female labor force participation gap.
Exactly. Solving the environmental crisis could be the key to unlocking a whole new era of sustainable, fully equitable growth.
Think about the structural reality of that. They have all the ingredients, they have the human capital, they just need to plug it into a new engine.
A green engine.
Yeah, and this ties directly to the broader global context. You listening to this, you live in a world where virtually every modern nation is struggling with this exact balance. How do we keep our standards of living high without destroying the biosphere?
Trinidad and Tobago isn't an anomaly.
No, they are simply the most vivid, high-contrast, high-definition example of the global tension between human prosperity and Earth's survival. They are the canary in the coal mine, except the canary has a PhD, universal health care, and an incredibly high carbon footprint.
It is a powerful lesson in the complexity of progress. The data shows us that human development is a continuous negotiation between what we can build for our citizens today
Yeah.
and what it will cost the planet tomorrow.
It is a fascinating tension. The way the data forces us to reconsider the entire definition of progress is incredible.
It really is.
Now, I want to leave a final lingering thought on the table, something for you to chew on that builds on everything we've just discussed about how we measure success.
Right.
Think about the global financial system right now. Trillions of dollars in foreign aid, sovereign debt, and international investment are guided by traditional metrics like GDP and the standard HDI.
Right. The old rules.
What would happen tomorrow if the World Bank, international investors, and global treaties completely stopped using standard HDI or GDP to measure a country's success?
Oh.
What if they exclusively use the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, the PHDI? If a nation's ability to get cheap loans or secure trade deals depended entirely on high human development without ecological destruction, how fast would the world map of wealth and power flip upside down?
It would rewrite the geopolitical hierarchy overnight. The nations we currently view as developing might suddenly hold the highest structural value.
It really would. Look at your own country's environmental price tag. Flip your own nation's report card over and see what's written in red ink on the back. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the source material.